The 8 Harry Potter films are among the most beloved cinematic adaptations in history. Based on the book series of the same name by J.K. Rowling, the journey from page to screen saw this intellectual property pass through the hands of 4 different directors: Chris Columbus, Alfonso Cuarón, Mike Newell, David Yates. What fascinates me is each director's unique vision gave this mythology a completely different feel. The same characters, the same castle, the same world, but when given different visions from these different directors, Hogwarts takes a completely different feel. See, when you take Columbus's and Cuarón's vision, for example, there's a clear disconnect in their visual style of filmmaking, and that disconnect fundamentally changes the trajectory of the series moving forward from The Prisoner of Azkaban. Chris Columbus directed the first 2 films, and if you look at his filmography, films like Home Alone, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Pixels, you'll notice that he has a unique style. His films are generally bright, there's a lot of movement from the characters during dialogue itself, but the camera stays locked in as this dialogue is happening. He uses quick cuts and zoom-ins to build tension, and what you could take from that is that he primarily uses editing techniques but keeps the camera still as the characters themselves move around to emphasize the importance of the dialogue that they are speaking in that moment. Columbus also brought the Gothic architecture of Hogwarts to life and leaned heavily towards practical effects. He used built sets, custom costumes, and they created creatures with these practical effects. He brought a very festive and almost Christmas card feel to Hogwarts, focusing on the wonder and the whimsy of the story. His Hogwarts is a place that you want to visit. It's warm, inviting, it's magical, in the most literal sense, visual wise. I think it really fits because the first 2 movies are a kind of setup for the rest of the story, and because Harry is still a child at this point, he's not a teenager yet. You know, you're not gonna just immediately throw him into some like traumatizing event. I feel like The Prisoner of Azkaban would be like the first part of the story where Harry actually has to deal with some issues concerning his identity and what he wants to be moving forward. And I think that when Christopher Columbus announced that he was walking away from the series and Warner Bros. Needed someone new, and they brought in Alfonso Cuarón, he was someone who would see the wizarding world as something not like a fairy tale, as Columbus did, but something darker and complicated. And I think that was a good choice, and it sets a turning point for the series. Cuarón's approach redefined what Harry Potter would be as a franchise moving forward. He took the whimsy and bright colors of the first 2 films and exchanged them for a darker color palette. The camera was no longer locked in. Instead, he used continuous sweeping shots to show the newly imagined Hogwarts. I think that the scene in the Great Hall where Dumbledore makes his announcement truly has Cuarón's touch. The lighting is moody, the camera glides through the hall, capturing the students' reactions. The atmosphere is tense and foreboding, and it's a far cry from the bright, festive feast of Columbus's films. David Yates had a similar scene in The Half-Blood Prince, with Dumbledore announcing something in the Great Hall, but it just doesn't have the same feeling. The tension isn't there, the atmosphere isn't there. Yates took the elements of Cuarón's style, the muted color palette and the darker tone, but I think it's the way that the camera is also just still, it's just cutbacks back and forth, recuts, and it doesn't have the same dynamic feel that Cuarón has. I feel that the darker tone was needed for this part of the story. Harry is coming into his teenage years, and narratively, the first 2 films set up the series to move forward with the overall story. We are at a perfect place in the plot for Harry to have turmoil.
Harry, what happened?
He was their friend, and he betrayed them. He was their friend! I hope he finds me. Because when he does, I'm gonna be ready. When he does, I'm gonna kill him.
And Cuarón was the perfect director to take it there. So now the question would be, what exactly made Cuarón's vision so different, and why did it set a precedent for the rest of the series to follow? Cuarón's approach in The Prisoner of Azkaban, not as a children's fantasy, but as a kind of like a noir thriller, honestly, because he saw Harry's story as one of trauma, fear, and loss of innocence. and he used every tool of cinema: color, camera movement, sound, architecture, to tell that story. In doing so, he didn't just make a great Harry Potter film, he gave the franchise its permanent visual identity, a visual identity that Warner Bros. Could never let go of. The most noticeable choice Cuarón did was the change in the color palette. Columbus used warm golds to make the world feel safe, and in general, his style just had a lot more bright colors and a more festive feel. Yates, in later films, used muddy browns and blacks to make the world feel bleak. But Cuarón used desaturated blues and cold silvers for a very specific reason, and that was to externalize Harry's trauma. The Dementors themselves aren't just monsters, they're depression and grief. Cuarón made the entire visual world to reflect Harry's internal state. When Harry meets the first Dementor on the Hogwarts Express, Cuarón builds tension through silence and sound design. The fog creeps in, the windows frost over, and then the rasping breath of the Dementor. Cuarón understood that what you don't see is often scarier than what you do. In the night bus, the camera moves fluidly and follows the night bus as it weaves through traffic. It's a chaotic scene, it's slightly threatening, but it's utterly magical, but in a way that feels dangerous and not whimsical. And I feel like Christopher Columbus would pull, not Christopher Columbus, I always get that wrong. That's a crazy mix-up, I feel. But Chris Columbus would pull off this scene differently.
Lord Lady at 12 o'clock. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 3.5, 2, 1 3/4. Yes!
And yeah, Chris would have done it differently because his camera is static and it sits and watches as the characters do their thing, and he uses quick cuts. But Cuarón's camera moves with the characters. It lives in the scene, it glides, and it is a participant in the action. Cuarón's most lasting legacy would be his visuals. The logo he created for The Prisoner of Azkaban, with the scratched silver Gothic typography, became the franchise's permanent signature. Every film after Azkaban used it. Every piece in the merchandise, every DVD cover, every theme park poster. When you walk into the wizarding world of Harry Potter at Universal Studios, I'd argue that you're seeing Cuarón's vision. When you see the Dementors in the video game, you're seeing Cuarón's design. When you hear the Dementor's breath in the theme park attraction, you're hearing Cuarón's audio. Starting with Cuarón, the Harry Potter series became progressively darker in both looks and content. David Yates, who directed the final 4 films, continued this tradition. The blues became grays and the silvers became blacks. The films grew grimmer, bleaker, and more warlike. Move forward and say that Cuarón, he understood that a great adaptation doesn't just copy its source material, it translates the essence of it into a new language. And Cuarón spoke the language of film fluently. And he used color to externalize trauma. He used the camera movement to create emotion and silence to build tension. And he used, in visual decisions, he gave the franchise a permanent face.
Specto Patronum!
I think that it's impressive how you direct one film in an 8-film series, and you essentially give the film its identity for the rest of the series. I think that's just impressive. That is very impressive. It shows Cuarón's proficiency at the language of cinematography and his faithfulness to creating a good adaptation. And yeah, you should watch the movie if you haven't seen it. I think it's really good.